What's good? It's your big homie SicksentZ. Before I get started, I hope you're doing okay. If you're having a bad day, if you're having a bad week, if it's been a rough year, I just want you to know you got some positive energy from me to you. I feel like somebody needed to hear that today. I know I've had countless days throughout the year where I feel like I needed to hear that from somebody. So if you're looking at this video and it's just been a rough fucking time, know that my heart's here with you. And I hope all is going to go well. And I know all is going to go well. Just hang in there. So on the opposite side of positivity, I wanted to talk about this Griselda album. I think Griselda and Derringer have done an amazing job at keeping the underground, gritty, boom bap, hip hop sound that I love alive. And it was really cool to watch a bit of the documentary that they put out that basically covers the process of making the album, because they spend an entire piece of it talking about Derringer. And in putting this album together, it turns out no samples were used. So you've got something that's probably the most grimy, gritty, mainstream crossing over album in our hip hop space, but it doesn't use any of the traditional ripped from vinyl, ripped from cassette samples. It's Derringer and Beat Butcher are actually just getting into a studio, taking their own sounds and processing them so they sound like they were sampled off of records. This is very intentional and very important. Spotting samples is easier to do now than ever. The algorithms and software to support it are crazy. If you produced a record and you ripped off of vinyl, you're going to have to come out of pocket if you haven't done so already. And the guys at Griselda knew that. The guys at Griselda also knew that they had a core audience to maintain that relied on that sample-heavy sound. So I thought it was really cool, really brave, and really impressive to see these producers step in and say, hey, we're going to make the same type of texture off of our own shit and succeed at it. Lots of your favorite and my favorite producers aren't making beats anymore because of sample clearance issues. They didn't get their proper pay, or they had to pay in the back end, and that was it. And that's not something that I want to happen to you or me, despite our love for this sampled boom bap music. And that's why it's oh so important for us to figure out how to still carry on that sound while sampling things that we have rights over, whether that's sounds that you make yourself or bands and groups that you record with the purpose of sampling later. But as I've transitioned to iOS, I found that there's a couple of amazing apps that emulate the old school sampling process and the effects that went into sampling back in the 90s, and where you got some of that amazing texture. And in using workflows on the iPad, I don't have to go to records to get the same sound. So today, let's talk about 3 techniques that I'm using when I want to get the sample sound into my beats without sampling from records on iOS. If you like this kind of content, do me a favor, like and subscribe to the channel. And let me know what your favorite record of the Griselda album is below. I think mine is Cocaine Cruiserweights. Is it Cocaine Cruiserweights? Cruiserweight Cocaine. It has Cruiserweights and cocaine in the title. The beat is fucking phenomenal. So the first thing that I think about when we're talking dirty underground beats is the drums. And in most of these Griselda sounding beats and most sample heavy beats, the drums are either fully breaks or augmented by breaks with some live drums added on top of it. And breaks are actually a lot easier to get nowadays than they ever were. In fact, if you're a Splice user, for example, there's an infinite source of already processed breaks that you can just drag and drop into your production, and you get that sound right away. But I've actually had a lot of fun making my own breaks using GarageBand. So let's take a look into the iPad, and I'll show you how I use the Live Drummer tool and then a couple of effects to create breaks and create drum loops in real time that can be used in Beatmaker 3. Alright, so we have the iPad loaded up. I have GarageBand open. And like I mentioned, GarageBand has this really cool live drummer feature where we can set up some basic parameters and have a live drummer play essentially a break for us. So I'm going to load an instance of this up. We'll just hit acoustic. And it defaults to a standard drummer. You can get a fill right out of the way. has more of like a, I guess, a 80s pop kind of vibe or whatever. I'm just going to click on the drummer head there, and you have different drum genres, different types. You've got R&B, alternative, songwriter types. You've got pop songwriters, funky songwriters. I'm going to use Benny, who's a modern Motown drummer. And now you can adjust basic parameters like how loud the drummer plays, how soft they play, how simple the pattern is, and how complex the pattern is. Especially for like boom bap, underground hip hop, it might make more sense to keep the pattern simple. That gives you more space for your MC and gives you more space to do programming on top of things. But if you want to go back and chop things up a lot further, it might make more sense to use a complex pattern, because you'll get all those little intricate bits and pieces in the middle that you can then chop down. So let's just play around and see what sounds good. Added some swing, and you can even engage other percussion. I love that ride. Cool. I like the way this sounds. We really could just bounce this out and then put it into Beatmaker and start to affect it further, but since we're in GarageBand already, what I'll start to do is add some of the plugins that I normally would use in a beat, just so we can start to hear how you can degrade a loop further and get to that sample vinyl sound without using a record. Took off the built-in compression and EQ, so we can just have a dry signal to play with. So one of the first things I love using is low-fly dirt. I like the SP1200 sound and the default sound. Usually I'll kind of cycle between the 1200 sound and the default and see which one I like most. For drums, I've been liking the default one a lot most. That might be the case here. I'm doing some gain staging along the way. I like to hit the ends kind of hard on low-fly dirt and then turn things down on the output stage. That gives you more headroom to do some more playing later. But that sounds pretty good to me. So let's A/B that. Has a nice feel to it. I want to further mangle this, so we're going to add another effect. Let's do something with some grit, some saturation. Yeah, let's go with Make Louder from JAX. Now, let's start to add some transient punch back, and we can use this to really make sure we have the attack that you want associated with the hard break, but then we can also add that boominess and things like that. So I'm gonna just add an additional instrument, and that's FAC Transient. Transient has like your basic envelope section. So first I'm going to add some attack, and then I might add some boominess via the sustain. We might boost both. Let's see how it sounds. dry that signal out if you need to. This plugin is amazing if you want a really tight sound, but want a boomier sound. Honestly, like, I went into this thinking I'd want just a boomy sound, but tightening things up a bit is actually really cool. You get a lot more of that explosiveness from the transients. Listen to it again. More room. Less room sound, more tightness. Really depends on what you want. This sounds more like a record to me. And you've got a dry wet. Run a parallel. Sounds good. So we'll do the before. Add low fly dirt. Make louder. All bypassed. All engaged. Cool. So now that that's done, I can bounce this, put it into Beatmaker or whatever other DAW that I want to use. And I've got my own break sound that nobody has, that nobody can reproduce because we made it right here on the fly. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, we've got Beatmaker open for this. We're going to take a melodic sound and give it some more vintage vibe to it, give it some character. So I have a blank session opened up. I'm just going to click on Browse, and this loads up our samples. If you saw my previous video, I talked a lot about organizing your samples. So now I can grab something really quickly. I know I want to work with a guitar sound. So I can just go to categories, go to guitar, and all of my guitar samples are down here. I'm just going to grab something that has like a single note. I think this is the dip collection. Yeah, sounds great. I like that sample because it has a lot of sustain on it. But our whole thing that we want to do is really give this thing some character, give this thing some texture. And in order to do that, I'm just going to start to add some of the effects that we normally hear associated with like underground hip hop. We're going to saturate it. We're going to do some bit reduction, maybe add some wow and flutter, and really try to make it sound a bit more warped out and a bit more character filled. So let's go to audio effects. First thing I want to do actually is go to live stretch, and this will allow us to make sure that whatever pitch we play these notes back at, they'll play at the same tempo. That's great for playing chords. You could use high quality. This iPad can probably handle it, but I actually prefer the sound of high performance. I always encourage trying the lo-fi sound of a sampler first. It's better for your system resources, obviously, but it's also one of the things that sounds different in every DAW and different in every piece of hardware. So you end up picking up some character that might be unique to that DAW. So I'm going to use high performance mode for the sampler. And I actually might turn the polyphony up to 4 notes or 4 voices. So this way we could play chords once we get the sound sounding the way we want it. So let's add an audio effect. Let's start with, oh yeah, you know what? Let's start with this awesome effect. This is called Time Machine, and Time Machine is great. You hear it immediately. Crackle and air and hiss and all of that sound that's associated with vinyl and with vinyl emulation. The settings are pretty straightforward. If you look down here, you can change the year, and the more current the record is, the less noisy it sounds. You also can control the noise directly here. if we play these notes, we've already given this a lot of character. I really love the warp feature because it adds a little bit of like wow and flutter, that little slight pitch variation that you get with vinyl and with cassettes. And every plugin's going to do that a little bit different, but the sound on this one particularly is really nice. It's very musical. It's subtle, but it's there. I'm gonna bring that wear down a bit. And you know what? For the sake of figuring out our sound, we'll turn polyphony off for a minute. We'll play with that later. Do a little less dust, less hiss. Because I'm going to use some other plugins that also introduce some of this later. So it took some of that low end out. Some slight widening. I like it. I love it actually. Let's A/B those. So we've lost the low end. That's something to think about, but it just sounds older already for that reason. Like low end wasn't as defined if you go back further and further, so that makes sense. And when you start to think about the overall beat, I'm going to get low end from my kick, from my bass, so you can't worry about those kinds of trade-offs. So cool. I like the sound that we're getting from Time Machine. Another effect that I love adding into the chain just to give a bit more color and saturation is a variation of the S950, which is a classic piece of hardware used in countless hip-hop productions, countless classic records. So we're just going to add an instance in here. I also like using it for gain staging too. So that RX 950, we'll load that up. This thing is cool. You could even go into mono. Open up the filter a little bit. And again, it's great for gain control. We've got an input section here. Output section here. And now our little guitar one shot has just picked up so much character, so much definition. This sound itself I'm ready to play with, but I'll actually just highlight one more plugin that I really like using. It's probably my favorite effect plugin on the iPad, and that's RE1. This is if you know me, you know I love space echoes, and it's reminiscent of the Space Echo reverb, the 201, the RE201. Has multiple heads, has really awesome saturation, really cool feedback, really cool spacing. In addition to adding the dubby reverb sound that we like, it can do so much cool saturation, and it can do so much, widening of the signal. So it's a really flexible plugin. We'll start to tweak it a little bit. Here's that stereo spread. You really want headphones on for this, by the way. Like, I'm gonna take the stereo out again so you can hear that difference. It's nuts. Narrow. Now let's widen it. Beautiful. Let's pan a bit. Introduce some feedback. Now here's that awesome saturation I was talking about. Now we'll introduce some wow and flutter. Again, these are two really really awesome and commonly used cassette and vinyl emulation effects that really just add more character and pitch variation to everything. Beautiful. I'm going to adjust the dry wet on this a little bit, just so we get a little bit less verb. Add a little more hiss. Beautiful. So 3 quick plugins that we added to our little chord sound. I'll play this dry. Just felt like the room disappeared, but that's that reverb and that noise disappearing. Sounds super modern. Night and day difference. Full of color, full of character. You put some drums over this, we're in a space already. And, you know, one of the other cool things I'll talk about really quick when it comes down to Beatmaker, let's get these audio effects out of the way. If you go to chords, I now can pull up just a plethora of different chords to play with. And let's actually turn polyphony back on to 4 voices. Now, if I want to get some of those really weird jazz infused chords, and I don't know them offhand, I can just start to play with some of the harmonic minors, some of these sevenths. I really like harmonic minor 7 flat 5s. That's nuts. That is nuts. Let's turn that down a bit. So much of like that, again, that boom bap shit that we love is like jazz influenced chords and these sevenths and these ninths and these flat and diminished chords. So I really, really like that Beatmaker has that built in, just this whole listing of chords that you can go through and kind of get weird ideas out of. We just took one single guitar note and took it to a completely different place within a few minutes. So the last thing we'll talk about is chopping up soul and chopping up, you know, full compositions. And as much as you can get into the dirty sound of underground hip hop, if you're not sampling full compositions, you're not going to get that same texture. That's just a part of the process. That's just a sound that comes with hip hop. Fortunately, if you have some control over the sample material, you can use sample material that is royalty free, whether that's grabbing something from a band that you know perhaps, or grabbing something from a sample library that is just a loop that allows you to then tweak and break and chop things down further. Today we're going to use a collection that's in Splice. So again, I'm just going to go to my browser and we've organized things. So I can go to categories and I have a category called sample stacks. These are soul sample stacks that I've gotten from Splice. They're just loops that are like funk and soul compositions that are made for you to then tweak further. So let's just give these a listen. I'll load that up. And what's cool about the sampler that you have in Beatmaker, I can start to chop stuff up really quickly. If you know the tempo, it'll actually do a lot of the groundwork for you. So the tempo on this sample is 80, as you can see in the title of it. That's the other cool part about sampling from things like Splice. The kits tend to be a bit more organized. So we're just going to make that 80 BPMs. And now I can slice this up manually if I wanted to, just by like going to slice mode and then dropping slices wherever I wanted. But I can also go to auto slice since we know the tempo, go to grid and then chop this up automatically and get these little bits and pieces. Hit save. We'll slice this to pads. We'll put them all in the same choke group so each pad cuts off the other pads. They don't play at the same time. And hit apply. And that's it. These things are chopped up. And what's cool about Beatmaker, once I have these chopped up in the pads like this, let's say I like this sound, but I want to go to a different pitch. I can change the pitch in, you know, the sampler right here. Right? Or I can just go to keys. It's funny, if you turn on polyphony, this is not going to sound great. But if you turn on polyphony, you could then play even chords with that. Oh, it doesn't sound that bad. And again, now you could add effects, you know, downsample, resample, all that good shit. But that's pretty much it. We took something that was royalty free. We now have it sliced across pads like it was something done in a record. We can apply some of those same sound design techniques if you want to get it to sound more bit reduced. But the important thing is we now have stacked pieces of full audio across these pads that we can now chop up just like you would any other record. So again, I'm really excited to hear the underground boom bap sound is alive and well. Big salute to Griselda. The WWCD album is fantastic. If you haven't heard it already, there's a link below. And I'm curious, if you've heard the album, what's your favorite track from it? Definitely let me know in the comments below. And if you like this type of material, again, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel so you can catch the next video. Once again, if you're having a rough day, hopefully this turns it up a little bit. Holler at me if you need to talk to somebody too. It's your boy SicksentZ. Until next time, peace.